Welcome to State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. The State of Wellbeing is a holistic well-being podcast with the goal of supporting the campus community as we strive to be a growing, high-performing, and healthy university.
Welcome to State of Wellbeing. I'm Caitlin Walters, the Wellbeing Specialist for campus, and joining me today is Julia Walker. Julia, do you want to introduce yourself?
I do. Yes, my name is Julia Walker. I've worked at the Student Health Clinic and Counseling Services as a counselor full-time for 5 years. And before that, I did 3 semesters of internship. And I'm so excited to go more in depth today about anxiety and social anxiety.
Thank you so much for being here. You are the guest of our most popular episode, which is the original anxiety episode, which aired really early on in our earlier first season. But we're happy to have you back to talk a little bit more in depth. And I could see this kind of being a series with us of talking about different types of anxiety, just because I think that it's one of those things that people either hear or self-diagnose or are diagnosed with. And I think it's just really helpful to get out more information about it because people really hear about it a lot.
Absolutely, yes. And before we get into everything, just to preface, I do want to say that I'm speaking in a very general sense with some of the questions that we've already come up with. Anxiety conditions are often diagnosed with other conditions. That makes everyone's experience very personalized and unique to them. And with that said, do know that this information shouldn't be used in lieu of therapy or other mental health support. And a lot of the information that I found, just to reference some statistics and some more empirical data that I found. So there's an article published on Very Well Mind that was authored by Dr. Deborah R. Glassover, and that was called The Difference Between GAD, Generalized Anxiety Disorder, and Social Anxiety Disorder.
Wonderful. So first of all, what is social anxiety and what can we kind of look for as signs that we may be experiencing, signs or symptoms that we're experiencing social anxiety?
Yeah. So we think about social anxiety, simply put, it's a persistent anxiety, that is excessive or disproportionate to the actual threat. And this is an anxiety that is specifically related to meeting new people, being observed, and performing in front of others. It's involved, social anxiety involves a lot of unhelpful thought spirals that focus on negative evaluation from others, so feeling judged or humiliated or embarrassed. And a lot of the symptoms or signs are very similar to generalized anxiety disorder. So some of the physical things like feeling nauseous, like you might vomit, trembling, sweating, those negative thought spirals like I mentioned. But there are a few more physical indicators of social anxiety. Those are things like blushing, trembling, stuttering, sweating, things that you might feel embarrassed or humiliated about if someone saw you doing them.
And what's the difference between generalized anxiety and social anxiety? I know you've kind of talked about it a little bit, but let's go a little bit more into that.
Absolutely, yeah. So the key difference is what the anxiety is centered around. So generalized anxiety is a worry about a range of topics that can be major life issues to daily stressors. Social anxiety tends to center around ongoing relationships or a fear of evaluation. Both conditions, they tend to lead the individual to avoid the thing that is triggering it, but the reasons underlying that avoidance is different. So avoiding being negatively evaluated, judged, or just wanting to avoid the thing that makes us stressed and makes us anxious. That avoidance is disruptive, it's distressing to that individual, and it affects their ability to develop and maintain relationships, fulfill basic social obligations, and meet their personal and professional potential. One other big difference between the two conditions is that generalized anxiety tends to be diagnosed around 30 years old, so in this early adulthood or not middle adulthood, I shouldn't say that, it makes me feel very old, but sort of out of the emerging adulthood, so college age. And social anxiety usually has an onset around 13 years old. So when we are seeing a lot of puberty changes that we might be self-conscious about, as well as just a focus developmentally on the groups that we're a part of and our social settings.
Well, and I could see that social anxiety would be really debilitating in college setting because, you're attending these large classes. You might be called upon by the professor or instructor to, respond to a question. This may be the first time that you're being asked to present in front of really large groups, and I could see that being really triggering. Along with kind of like you said, you're maybe in a new group of people, you're trying to meet new people, or it's the expectation is that when you're in college, you're introduced to a large new group of people, you're making new friends.
Lifelong friends. There's a lot of pressure.
So I could see this as something that would be, really challenging to deal with in college. Do you see it a lot in the counseling center?
I would say yes. And this sort of gets into the difference between someone who's still shy and introverted versus someone who would be diagnosed with social anxiety. But yes, we do see that anxiety in social settings and anxiety with peer interactions is a big reason why people are coming in. They're anxious to confront their roommate about leaving their dirty laundry out, or they feel like their roommate needs to be their best friend, or it's second semester, it's the spring semester, and they haven't met anyone besides their roommate, or they're sitting in class, they want to make friends, have a study group, but no one else is interacting with anyone else, so it feels very, very uncomfortable to be the person to reach out and be like, oh, hello, my name's so-and-so, how are you? Is this you been here before? You come here a lot? Like, yes. So
I remember it was kind of like, we had a trial overnight where we stayed at our college campus in the dorms, but we weren't admitted we'd been accepted, but we hadn't started school yet. And so it was over the summer. And I remember we were in a shared 3 dorm room area, and we had kind of like a shared space, and I walked out and said hello to the 2 other girls that were sharing the kind of shared space with me, and they just stared at me.
Oh my God.
And didn't say anything back. And I remember going back to my own private room and crying because it had felt so uncomfortable to be the person to put yourself out there and say hi and just be met with nothing.
Yeah.
And we didn't really have we had phones back then, but not the kind that you could hide in. They were just basically bricks at that point. And I remembered, just sobbing that night and feeling like I didn't want to go do that again because it was so uncomfortable to do in the first place, and to be met with really negative, just silence was really awful. And so, I could see and I was someone who I was very shy in high school. And very introverted. So can we talk a little bit about what is the difference between maybe being labeled as shy or introverted and then actual social anxiety?
Yeah. So let's put some definitions out there first. So being shy, I would define that more of like a personality trait. Someone that, they're selective about who they become close with, and they might not seem shy when they do have those close friendships or partnerships, but they wouldn't necessarily feel some social anxiety because that would mean that they are being socially anxious would mean that they're trying to avoid those close relationships, or it's hard to keep them going. And being introverted essentially is how you're recharging your battery. So you recharge your battery when you're alone. So going off of those definitions, social anxiety is different because there is that intense feeling of avoidance there. It stops you in your tracks. You become paralyzed with this anxiety and fear. All that to say, if you're shy or introverted or extroverted and very open with people, feeling anxiety or stress, whether it's in any setting or social setting specifically, that's normal, especially in young adulthood. Like giving a speech in front of your peers, you could be worried about being judged socially, but someone with social anxiety disorder might avoid going to class at all that day or that week. Is that a fair?
I think that's a really important distinction is it comes down to like, how does it manifest and what does it do to your experience? Like, are you able to get through the speech, or do you come down with an illness that day and can't go to, you're not going to class, and skipping it or missing it? I think that's a really helpful way to kind of distinguish between the differences. So we talked a little bit about, like being able to, maybe you're in a class and you're nervous about talking to others before class starts because everybody's on their phone. And these days it is maybe perceived as being a little weird when you're not on your phone and you're like actually talking to each other. So I want to talk a little bit about technology and then social anxiety. How does it maybe help? How does it maybe harm? What do you see as kind of the role of technology when it comes to social anxiety?
Absolutely. So the super unhelpful answer is that it depends. And if we're thinking about social anxiety specifically, my professional opinion is that technology sometimes does more harm than good. It gives us a lot of opportunities to avoid doing things face to face. And, I can't say for sure, but we're definitely seeing a difference between students who are in college now and that they went online for quarantine, especially at the start of their high school careers. That's a very important time for developing some of these social skills, trying out things socially, trying on different identities, traits, which is very normal, developmentally appropriate, but they didn't get a chance to get that feedback from other people in real time. So obviously technology makes those interactions, it slows them down so we can be very thoughtful about what we're saying, which can be helpful, but at the same time, we're not getting that immediate feedback from being in the room with someone. In addition to that, so technology, yes, easy to do Zoom calls, phone calls. I mean, I'm a millennial, so I still don't like using my phone to make phone calls. But social media specifically, that I think also adds to this fear of being judged or perceived negatively because we have to act or look a certain way in front of our peers. We see everyone else's highlight reels, but we know all of our shortcomings. And I think a lot of people in general, but definitely when you grew up with technology and very familiar with like Instagram, TikTok, these short form video social media apps, we're always worried about going viral for a bad thing, right? And we're told once something's on the internet, you can't delete it. So I can definitely see how that plays a role in heightening this already. It's risky putting something on the internet, posting a picture. There are some very mean people out there, and it also makes it easy to judge other people because you're not face to face getting that feedback.
Yeah, and when you say like you can never delete anything, I have a friend who was up for a really high level position, and the company that they had applied for this person was basically getting the job. They had the offer, and then the company went back in this person's Twitter account, went back when it was Twitter, went back years and had found just a simple comment that the person had made. I don't even think it was like a major post on their account. And they rescinded the offer because of what the comment had said. And so I do think that there is a little bit of like, we should be mindful of what we're putting on social media and be aware that, yes, companies do go back and look at those. And I'm sure that adds to the pressure of like, just it can't help when we go into the real world when we're worried about like, oh, did they look at my old posts from 2016 because different person back then, right?
Absolutely. And all that to say, there's a difference between like you and I growing up in high school and we were taking pictures on these digital cameras or cameras with film still in them, not to make ourselves feel older than we are, but those things, I could say something silly or something that I'm like, ooh, no, let me run that back and forget about it, have it be gone. But when we're growing up and we're so used to everything being online, even I think about millennial parents, I don't want to throw them under the bus or anything like that, but for a while there, it was so common to post pictures and videos of your kids growing up. So there's this privacy and security feeling of like, well, my entire life has been online, so I just need to go through life with this idea that I could be being recorded at any moment in time, and dear God, that's stressful.
Mm-hmm.
But technology can still be helpful as a way to connect with support groups and counseling. You can still get some social interaction in a way that is accessible. There can be some exposure therapy or desensitization that can happen with that too. We have information at our fingertips, so we can still perform to some level academically and occupationally. But again, there is that caveat of it's very easy to use technology to avoid practicing and getting better with our social skills.
Well, and I think, we can't, I don't know that I really prepped you for this topic, but I don't think we can talk about technology without maybe addressing the AI of it all.
Yeah.
I just read an article recently that was really fascinating about how people are using AI to kind of kick off dating conversations. And so they're using AI for their banter, if you will, when it comes to maybe like a dating app. So they're using AI to kind of filter their responses before they send them, or maybe AI is just writing the entire conversation for them. But then when they get into the real world, those conversations are so different that it almost is kind of coming off as like a little bit of catfishing in the conversation realm, right? And so people are maybe put off by that, and then of course the date is maybe a little different because you thought you were talking to one person and the way they were talking was one way, but then in real life, like, we don't talk like AI bots, and so
so true.
But then they also studied and they found that people responded better to the AI conversation, but they also said they don't like that people are using AI. But when you tested them, so they would test them with like, which conversation did you like better? They were almost always picking the AI conversation. But then in the real world, when they found out, oh, I know this person was using AI, I don't like that. And so I think just being like careful with how we use AI and being conscious of, what is this benefiting me? What is it detracting? Like, I'm not learning the skills of like having back and forth conversation because I'm just small talk. Yeah. Or even, I've seen people who've used it for, we see it all the time on social media where people use it for like drafting an apology for something that they did, and you can just tell that it came from AI. And so I think, questioning just what am I missing when I use this tool? And I think that's for all technology and all social media and AI. I follow this really wonderful economist who talks about screen time for children, but I think it could go for adults too. The question is, what is the screen time replacing?
Yeah.
And what is the technology, like what is the AI tool replacing? And I think there are responsible ways that you can use social media, that you can use screen time to connect with friends, but then also like question, well, what is it replacing? If I'm scrolling on my phone for 6 hours and I'm not getting, these things done, I think it can harm your ability to like get out and meet people. I just saw somewhere that like Gen Z is on track to spend 25 years of their lives scrolling.
Wow.
And if you think of like people who are spending about 5, 7, 8 hours a day on their phone, that adds up and over time. But if you think like, do I really want to spend 25 years of my life? Maybe I'm connecting to my friends. It feels easier to connect with friends on social media, but I'm missing out on like the time that I could be spending together with them in person.
Yes, face to face. And we know that gives us so much more as human beings interacting face to face. I mean, think about when we were quarantined. We felt that change. We felt that emptiness and the difference that caused by not being face to face with people. We know that meeting over Zoom or talking with a family member over FaceTime is very different than being in the room with them. As a therapist, I think about having counseling sessions over Zoom, and there is just nothing that really can really describe or pin down that feeling of just being in the room with someone and having being able to pick up on their energy, and if something didn't hit right, or like when you're talking with them. So there's that, like I mentioned before, that feedback that we get by sitting down in a room with someone, looking them in the eye, and just being two humans together, you know?
Well, and I think of how rusty we all felt coming out of quarantine. And, I lived in a state that we were quarantined for quite a long time. I didn't go back to work until, mid-July. I was in my house. And then even when I went back, I only went back a couple days a week. And I remember feeling like so awkward around people. But eventually over time that faded. And I guess I'm saying that to say that it's something that you can practice. It's almost like a muscle that you can strengthen.
Absolutely.
I even just recently returned from maternity leave, and even maternity leave where I was basically just like home with my infant and my husband for several months. And even coming back from that, I said to a couple of people, like, I feel like I've lost my like ability to like talk to other adult humans. But then again, like, it's been a couple of weeks, a couple months since I've been back, and it is like you start to feel stronger with it the more you practice it. And so I just think that like I think the power of like putting yourself out there and practicing it, even though it can feel uncomfortable, goes a long way, because it kind of helps you kind of get over that, like, this doesn't feel natural.
Yes. Because
we've all been there, right? Like, we all got stuck in our houses and had to quarantine. And I think we all we've all almost, I wouldn't say forgotten how that felt to try to like come back into the real world altogether. But I do think like over time, if the uncomfortableness of that can fade.
Yes. And as human beings, it's so important to recognize that discomfort, we associate discomfort with being threatened. So anything that gives us some discomfort, we immediately, this old part of our brain is like, oh no, danger. So the more that we're willing to put ourselves in discomfort, what's the quote? Like, growth happens when you're outside of your comfort zone. So being able to flex that muscle again and again and again, we build it up. It's like you wouldn't immediately go to the welly and try to bench 300 pounds. You would start with the 2-pound weights. So there are ways to, exactly like you said, build up these skills, practice. Even if we do have a diagnosis of social anxiety, we're able to work with it and recognize where it's coming from and build up these muscles and gain these skills to manage it so that it's not such a distressing thing for us.
So kind of moving right into our next topic, how do we manage social anxiety? Maybe when we do have to go into those, larger settings or settings that kind of trigger that anxiety.
Yeah, so obviously as a counselor, my first recommendation is to talk to a therapist. On campus, if you're enrolled in classes, you are eligible to, I shouldn't say you are eligible, your student activity fees help to pay for counseling. So the way that would work is if you would want to talk to a counselor, you would just walk into the Student Health Clinic and Counseling Services lobby. We're located in the Miller Wellness Center. And you would go up to the front desk, say you'd like to meet with a counselor for a mental health screening, fill out a little bit of paperwork, and then you'd be meeting with a counselor the same day. And we can address some of these things. Specifically talking about social anxiety, we can start to piece out, is this sort of normalized or like something to expect about being stressed? Like, yeah, you're moving in with a stranger. That's anxiety inducing. Some of these things that are expected and normal versus what is out of the ordinary, disproportionate, like we said. And all that to say, probably should have led into this before I started talking more in depth. But if you're walking into the wellness center, if you're walking into the student health clinic and going in for a mental health screening, that is same day. We don't charge insurance. So like I said, it is free for students, and we currently don't have a wait list. So you're able to meet with a counselor and continue meeting with a counselor to work on some of these concerns. Other than therapy, getting that individualized mental health support in general, if you are meeting, like if you're in a crowded room, that can be a cause for social anxiety. Also, if you're meeting with someone one-on-one, like a professor for office hours, that can also cause some social anxiety because you're worried, like, oh, they're going to think I'm an idiot. But, you know, like you're 19 and you've never taken this class before. Yeah, you might not feel like you're the smartest. But some things that can be helpful would be to avoid caffeine or other stimulants. Those can increase some of our anxiety symptoms, those physical symptoms of our heart racing, our thoughts racing, sweating, trembling, flushing in our face. You can practice grounding skills often and in low-stakes settings. So grounding skills are some of those things like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, so on and so forth. Or practicing our breathing to do, some deep breathing, focusing on making our exhales as long as possible. And what that does is it tells our body that we are not under threat. We are safe, we're secure. And when our body is calm, that engages our brain to come back online in a way. And then we can better address the thing that is causing us anxiety. So practicing those grounding skills, again, often and in low stakes settings. Like I said, you're not going to go to the welly and bench 300 pounds. You got to start with the 2-pound weights. And then you can grow as you're feeling more confident in your abilities. And you want to learn to identify and challenge some unhelpful thinking styles. So that could be, an unhelpful thinking style would be catastrophizing. I was going to say maximalizing. That's not a word. Catastrophizing, where small disruptions are these huge things. That could be, I got an F on this exam. I am never going to get a job. I'm going to end up unhoused. That's catastrophizing, because saying it like that, where if I fail an exam, I'm going to end up without a job, we can't really relate those two things. So if I wanted to address that unhelpful thinking style, I would ask myself, I'd be curious, okay, am I missing some information here? Did anyone say that out loud? Where did this thought come from? And being curious and looking inward to just get to understand ourselves a little bit better. And even knowing that, okay, as a human being, I have these unhelpful thinking styles. It's sort of like taking off these rose-colored glasses. Yes. Let's see. This one's a little bit silly, but if you're having some social interaction, if you're in a crowd or if you're giving a speech or just trying to network with people, you can leave the situation while things are still positive. Leave on a good note. I'm kind of borrowing this from dog training because what trainers say is, you want to make sure that the interaction is positive and you leave on a good note. That way you're retraining your brain to say, okay, I did it. That wasn't too scary. I'm able to have this positive experience as evidence for the future. And you don't need to push yourself through your body's warning signs for the sake of getting better faster. We don't want to try and bench 300 pounds right away. A couple other things: going slow, having patience for yourself. Baby steps are still progress. And even if you aren't making like a tangible or measurable movement forward towards progress, that doesn't mean that you are, by nature of that, going backward. You're still keeping all of the progress that you had. And planning recovery time for yourself. So if you need time to decompress and process social interactions afterwards, definitely paying attention to what went well, what you'd like to try again or do differently next time. So talking ourselves through some of those unhelpful thinking styles, like, oh, that was just terrible. I said all of these stupid things. Like, no, I did a really good job listening to that person and still managing my own thoughts and feelings and reactions at the same time. So yes, planning recovery time. I know as a counselor and an introvert, and someone with anxiety, not social anxiety, but I do need to plan some decompression time after work because I talk and pivot in conversations all day. So there's about an hour and a half after work where I look at my partner and I'm like, I can't. I can't talk. I can't interact with you. So I need that recovery time. And just a little bit of help with small talk specifically. We all hate it. We all hate icebreakers. We know that small talk sucks. But keeping a couple conversation topics in your back pocket so you don't have to think too hard about them can be helpful. So one of the things that I encourage students to remember is the acronym FORE, F-O-R-E, like you're golfing, FORE, which FORE stands for Family, Occupation, Recreation, and Education. So these are generally safe topics for small talk. Practice them in a mirror, practice them with someone you trust, practice them with your pet, practice them to your water bottle, practice.
I also think there can be some like almost security in practicing it with complete strangers, which may or may not go with social anxiety, but you might never see that person again.
Absolutely.
And I find for me, like I do have anxiety, not necessarily social anxiety, but I do a lot of presenting on campus, and I actually feel way better about presenting to really large audiences.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm like, none of them will remember me, or like, you know what I mean? There's a little bit of security in that, like, I'll probably never see any of these people again. Or if I do, I won't know that they had been there. And I even think with practicing icebreakers, like those little small talk things, like if you're stuck in an elevator with someone, or, you know, just trying it out with someone that you might not ever see again. So it doesn't really matter, you know?
Yes.
I think that can be kind of helpful too.
Absolutely. Yes. Low stakes.
I think one of the important things too is, as someone who was diagnosed and I've seen a therapist for my own anxiety, just hearing the phrase, you don't have to white knuckle your anxiety.
Yes.
And I was, again, diagnosed like later in my life, in my 30s. But when I looked back, I realized that I had been dealing with like those really strong spiraling thoughts, like the symptoms of like, you know, stomach and flushing and like just feeling really, really triggered by certain things and not realizing for many years what it was. When I finally understood, like, you don't have to just like suffer through it. You can go seek help.
Yeah.
That was really a turning point for me, and I have noticed a huge difference in just like how I've been able to handle those things since seeing a therapist.
Amazing.
So what can going to the counseling center do to help manage that social anxiety?
Yeah. So going to the counseling center, specifically, you know, the counseling center on campus, but in general, seeing a therapist, that therapist is going to help you to understand these different external and internal things that are contributing to your social anxiety or anxiety in general. They'll help you to be curious and not judge yourself for having, you know, a normal human reaction or a normal reaction based on things that you've gone through already. And I think part of why therapy is wonderful and helpful for anyone, no matter what concern, I think about a quote. I'm not going to remember the name right, so I'm not going to say who it's by, but it's very easy to find, is that shame dies when stories are told in safe places. So even just unburdening yourself, letting the words hit the air of, man, I don't know what's happening. I feel like I'm the only person going through this, and having someone look you in the eye and say, I hear you. That's healing.
Absolutely.
So that's a big way that going to the counseling center can help, seeing a therapist can help with anxiety. The specific modality or treatment interventions that are used can vary person to person. We talk about cognitive behavioral therapy being really helpful, especially in addressing those unhelpful thoughts that lead us to avoid the things that are stressing us out. But there are lots of different paths to get to the same destination.
And you've already kind of mentioned the screening hours, but just to reiterate again, Monday through Fridays, 8:30 a.m. to 11 a.m., 12:30 to 3. And again, no fee, no wait list. Those are huge. Like, that's huge that we have that available here on this campus. And also, if maybe the student health clinic and counseling services aren't going to be the best fit for you. Maybe you need a little bit more intensive treatment or care. They'll certainly help connect you with the right resources in the Brookings or broader area.
Yeah.
But I just like to plug that. I think it's really helpful for people to know that, just come try it out if you feel like you're struggling and you feel like you've been doing it on your own for a really long time. It does, in my experience, it does make a huge difference for me when I talk to my therapist versus just, either keeping it to myself or talking to family members, which can be helpful, but they don't see the full picture. And so I think, just taking care of yourself in that way. And it's kind of like a checkup for your brain, right?
Yeah.
Like go in and talk to somebody. Well, Julia, thank you so much for joining us today. I thought this was really helpful, a little bit more deep dive into a specific side of anxiety. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So today's processing questions are, what are some of the physical signs or symptoms of social anxiety? And what are 2 tips for reducing social anxiety in social settings?
Thank you for listening to this episode of State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Wellbeing Team and SD State Health.